Alright, so just to introduce myself, my name is Jesse Moore, and this little presentation is to fulfill part of the requirements of the Nursing 452 class, Population and Health Practicum. So to begin, where I'm just going to introduce where I did my practicum. I traveled to several of different assisted living facilities in the area and gave some presentations regarding advanced directives. I think that this is a very important topic that I've only have noticed relatively recently after starting to work in the cardiac intensive care unit at Barnes. The floor that I work on is a very specialized unit, and we get a lot of patients after major heart attacks, big VFib arrests. We get a lot of transfers from outside hospitals or people really in really sick situations where they're unable to decide for themselves, and a lot of the times they're not able to progress. They'll end up with anoxic encephalopathy from being without oxygen for too long. So it brings the families to make their major medical decisions for them. And so if somebody hasn't predetermined what they would or wouldn't want done, a lot of the times the family's kind of left in the dark and kind of struggles amongst themselves to make healthcare decisions for them. So the population I went to, obviously, assisted living members in an assisted living population, and one of the big so after doing some of the research, one of the biggest statistics that I found is a large study with about 8,000 people surveyed whether they did or didn't have advanced directives, and only 26% of the people that responded did have advanced directives filled out. Several reasons why they did or didn't have them filled out. The most common was a lack of awareness, and so I think this is something that nurses can take to heart when we are educating patients, even younger. I mean, very important for everybody to have advanced directives. I feel like most of the emphasis is geared towards older people because they're probably going to die sooner. But a lot of the times, even younger people, like 30, 40, life's short. You never know what's going to happen. So very important to educate everybody about advanced directives. So there's certain groups that were more or less likely to have advanced directives filled out. People with chronic illnesses were more likely. People that were wealthier and had easier access to health care were more likely to have advanced directives filled out. And some groups were less likely to have advanced directives filled out. I know African Americans were a group that were pretty significantly less likely than Caucasians to have advanced directives filled out. So it's something that we can use to question a little more detail if they really know about advanced directives when we're admitting somebody. So those were some of the major points that I found that I discovered when I researched this. So what I did was I came up with a list on a pamphlet with some of the 5 most common questions that I felt were the most important about advanced directives, answered them in detail, and wrote that down and printed this pamphlet out and took this with me when I gave my little presentation. Passed it out to all the residents. And what the pamphlet, the 5 questions on the pamphlet, the first one I wrote was basically what advanced directives are, and I described that they're the patient's wishes for what they would or would not want done if they were unable to make their own healthcare decisions. I described that it set limits for if somebody wouldn't want to be on a ventilator. Described DNR. Described if they wouldn't want a feeding tube, things of that nature. Second question that I wrote down was what can happen if they don't have advanced directives filled out, and they are going back to earlier. It's the patient that something unexpected like a big stroke or a heart attack comes upon them when they're unable to decide for themselves what they would or wouldn't want done, and the family's kind of left unknowingly making decisions for this person, and they don't know if. I mean, a lot of times you can tell them that someone has anoxic encephalopathy and they're not going to recover, and the family still doesn't get that. So it's very important beforehand to write your wishes down. That way treatment isn't done that somebody ultimately wouldn't want. So I described that in detail. What can happen if they didn't have advanced directives? Next question I wrote was what are the benefits of them? Two of the most common ones were that ultimately the patient's wishes would be followed with regarding what they would or would not want done medically to them. Second most common benefit is that it's a lot easier on the families. It's a lot easier for a family member to make a big healthcare decision if they know that this is something that the patient would really want. So that's the second benefit. Next question I wrote was I described power of attorney in detail and described how the healthcare power of attorney differed from the standard power of attorney, which a lot of the residents didn't know. And the final question was if somebody wanted advance directives, what they had to do to make that happen. So I described the steps they would need to take to fill those out. So I thought this was a very informative experience. There's some things that I would change next time. I think one of the most common things I would do, or one of the things that I would do, would be to use more layman's terms when I describe some of the medical treatments that we as healthcare professionals perform to people, like ventilator, feeding tube. Kind of describe that in less technical terms and more layman's terms. So I felt that they would understand a little bit better. I thought one of the things that worked well is that a lot of the people didn't know about the differences between the healthcare power of attorney and a standard power of attorney. And then another thing that I think worked well is at the end of the discussion, or at the end of the presentation, I had some discussions with the residents where they could answer or ask any questions that they had, and we would kind of just talk, and I would give my input and answer their questions. So overall, some of the takeaways that I have, I really enjoyed conversing with the residents. I think that most older people are really pretty easy to talk to, and they're in an assisted living facility, they're kind of glad to get away from their daily routine and see somebody. So it was kind of easy, I think, for me to go and talk with them, and they seemed very appreciative from this. A lot of the residents already had advance directives filled out, but a lot of them weren't sure about certain areas of them, like power of attorney for healthcare, for instance. So I think that this is something that, even though somebody has advance directives filled out, they may not be sure about every little area of them. So I think that's another takeaway I had. So the main way that this will impact my practice is that I feel that I'm a lot more knowledgeable about advance directives in general. I kind of just had a vague idea of them earlier, just from nursing school in the past. And during the admitting process, we ask somebody if they want any information about it, and if they say yes, we just pawn it off on social work. I feel like that I'm a lot more knowledgeable on every step regarding that process, so I can answer their questions in detail. So, and then if I gauge that they aren't sure of it, I can probe a little further. So I think if more people had advance directives filled out, there would be a lot less medical costs for one, and there would be a lot more happier families at the end of life, just because if they know that what their loved one wish would really be done. So great class, and had a great time traveling around and discussing with the residents about advance directives, and see you all next semester.